Chapter 61. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 61. Hidden Force, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, night descended, and the moon's silvery light bathed the land. Nobody was left in the bathhouse anymore as Roy left, his skin red. Mount Carbon was majestic in the day, but eerie at night. The fortress that provided safety to the dwarves looked like a demon dwelling in the dark, but the valley's entrance was brightly lit. The bowmen and crossbowmen were standing sentry in the watchtowers that flanked the valley. Sconces hung on the front doors of every building between the plaza and the main fortress, providing good vision. Heavily armored dwarves were patrolling everywhere, and Roy bumped into the armed patrol twice on his way to the guest room from the bathhouse, much to his surprise. That's some heavy patrolling. Letho had already changed his bloody armor for his pajamas when Roy arrived at the guest room. He was meditating on the bed. "Did you get anything, boy?" "I made a few acquaintances, my hands got blisters, and I'm almost traumatized." Roy heaved a sigh and hopped onto the bed. He put his hands behind his neck and crossed his legs. "Try observing naked, hairy dwarves for a whole day and you'll know what I'm saying." Letho actually smiled for once. "So what did you find in the forest after leaving me here?" Letho told him about the events that transpired, and when he got to the part where he killed almost 100 wolves, Roy sighed. "I lost a few hundred EXP just like that." But he could imagine how precarious the situation must have been. With how weak he was, the wolves would have picked him clean before Letho could even do anything. Even so, he was still dissatisfied and curious. "Why do you want me to find out who's marked? If the Elder just locks everyone up and checks them, the marked one would be caught in no time. There's no way he would realize what was happening." Roy looked at Letho, but he was still meditating calmly. "Remember what I told you yesterday? Some residents in the mountains worship the Leshen as God. You can't be sure there's nobody else who's brainwashed aside from the one who's marked. It'd be impossible to hide a sweep from everyone no matter how secretive Brovar would be. Once the search was launched, the Leshen's followers would just escape, making it harder to kill it." Roy kept quiet before asking, "What if it's the Svanther villagers who got marked? I can't just go out there and investigate. It's too far from the mountain." "I'll look into that tomorrow, but don't hold your breath. Leshens love to live in mountains and forests, and they won't stay too far from the people they marked. Svanther is a bit too far from the mountain." He picked up a piece of charcoal and drew on the ground. "And there's something I want you to see. After destroying the totem, I asked Kerwin about the victims and found out exactly where they died." He drew a rough sketch of the mountain, and the fortress was located in it. "These are the places where the victims died." He then made 8 black dots on the map. "Notice anything wrong with it?" Roy looked closely for a while, but he didn't get anything. The crime scenes were spread throughout the mountain at random and seemed to have no rhyme or reason to it. Letho explained. "The spots where the killings happened are a distance away from where the victims lived. In other words, they were shepherded to that particular spot before they were killed, and the Leshen didn't choose the spots at random." Then Letho made 4 lines according to some pattern, linking one dot to the other. Then he pointed at one spot between 2 dots. "This is where I destroyed the totem today." "I see." Roy said, "You should probably have guessed where the other totems are, then." Letho kept linking the dots and lines in a pattern, and eventually, Roy noticed the thing that was starting to take shape. It was an expanding web, and a vague pair of antlers. A terrifyingly eerie mark. The Leshen is slowly including the mountain base up to the fortress in its totem. Is it trying to put the whole area under its control? Letho nodded. "I've never seen a more ambitious Leshen. In most cases, the most it can do is take over a village. That's the extent of a Leshen's power, no matter how ancient or formidable it is. This one is trying to control a place that houses thousands of residents. Leshens are ancient creatures with great wisdom. It's quite baffling that they'd make such a foolish move. No matter how powerful it is still only one less hen. Mount Carbon can easily crush it. Unless, Roy guessed, unless its believers and the Marked One aren't the Lushan's only weapon. Letho dusted his hand off and made an unsure guess. Or maybe the dwarves aren't as united as they seem. Maybe there are some other forces aside from the less hen that can cause some trouble for Brovar. And they could be giving the less hen a hand in its plan. They're hiding in Mount Carbon, working with the less hen to carry out the plan, and that's why they managed to kill so many dwarves without setting off the alarm. Should we tell Brovar about this? This is pure conjecture. We have no evidence or target. What can we even tell him? Letho had vetoed it. Just pay attention to your surroundings and see if there's anyone suspicious. But remember to find the Marked One first, since our primary goal is to take out the less hen here. Everything else comes next. And be careful. I understand. Letho went back to meditate after telling Roy what he'd needed to know. The battle earlier had sapped much of his strength, and he needed to rest up as fast as possible. Roy lay on the bed, sorting out the thoughts that were swirling in his head. He took the dwarf's crossbow and his hand crossbow out to maintain them. And then he remembered that Regan cared about the crossbow a lot. Is this crossbow special? He cast Observe on it and actually saw the weapon's details. Blood brothers, Regan Dalba was gifted this crossbow by his brother, Paul Dalba, during Regan's coming of age. This is the last gift Paul gave Regan before he ventured out to be Yarpen's follower. Type: crossbow. Materials: pine wood, steel, tendon, hemp. Details: weighs 15 pounds and measures 4 feet. Has a draw weight of 50 pounds and an effective range of 200 feet. Gabriel type. Hand crossbow materials: mulberry wood, tendon, hemp. Details: weighs 5 pounds and measures 2 feet. Has a draw weight of 20 pounds and an effective range of 100 feet. So Regan only cares about this crossbow because of its sentimental value. It's not that much better than any Mahakuman crossbow. Roy started rubbing the grease on every inch of the crossbow, just like how Regan did it. Once he was done doing it to both crossbows, he placed Blood Brothers in his inventory and held on to Gabriel as he started meditating. Always keep the crossbow by my side, huh? It's dumb, but I hope it works. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 62. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 62. 5th Mining Area, TL. Osaka, PR. Ash. Roy asked for a barrel of Mahakuman liquor after meeting up with Regan and his companions in the bathhouse the next day. Since he knew nothing about Mount Carbon, he needed some locals to help him out, and alcohol was the best way to make friends out of them. He thought Regan was a great person to be friends with since he hadn't flown into a rage despite having his crossbow taken from him. The 5 of them went to Regan's cave. Despite the fact that Regan was the best crossbowman around, his cave was stark. There wasn't anything aside from a bed, table, chair, and oil lamp. Not even a cauldron was in there, so obviously he never cooked himself. Wow, and I thought only single men in my world lived so simply. Didn't think it'd be true in another world. Guess he needs to get a girlfriend. Regan wiped away the dust on the table with his sleeve before placing a dozen 2-ounce cups filled with alcohol. The aroma wafted across the cave, and the dwarves indulged themselves in the sweet scent of liquor. Wow, these guys look like Vivian's dad. Roy never understood the magic of wine. He never knew why it captivated the souls of so many. I'll be your match for the day. Regan beamed at the wine. No tricks here, and the rules are simple. We'll start at the same time, and the match ends when one of us drops. The one who drinks the most wine wins. B.Boss, you H. had a match Y. yesterday, so Y. you should sit T. this one out. R. Rest up. Barney pulled him back, his eyes filled with anticipation. I'll do it for you. No you won't, you dumbass. Remember the last time we drank? You were out cold after 3 shots. Drew pushed Barney's face away, and then he rubbed his hands. Reagan and Dave had their chance. Now it's my turn. No, I'll do it. Dave didn't want to give up either. Nobody's better than me in Gwent and drinking here. Enough. Reagan's face fell, and he chided, look at yourselves, you idiots. The match hasn't started yet, and you're already acting like wild beasts. How are we supposed to conclude the match if everyone's out cold? No drinking for you until either I or Roy drops. Reagan's companions stopped fighting. They didn't like the outcome, but they said nothing, though they craned their necks and stared at the wine on the table. Roy glanced at the wine on the table, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. If it were a fair match, he'd be out cold after 2 shots. But it wasn't a fair match. Dwarves took drinking seriously. Reagan sat down and finished 1 shot in a single gulp, though some of the wine trickled down his beard and fell onto his chest. It looked like a mini waterfall, drenching his coat and pants. Roy's lips twitched. That's not drinking. It's more like splashing wine around. He wasted 1/3 of the wine, but 2 can cheat at that game. Roy could put anything up to a certain size in his inventory, though he had to have control over said item. Incidentally, wine could be sent into his inventory too, and that rule could be applied to the wine in his mouth. He sat on his chair with his legs crossed, just like how Reagan did. Then he held the mug with both hands and glugged it down. A few moments later, he turned the mug around, showing that he'd finished all the wine, much to Reagan's surprise and approval. Unbeknownst to Reagan, all the wine had been sent into the inventory space, so Roy didn't even feel tipsy after that. Aside from the lingering taste of alcohol in his mouth, that was easier than gulping down a glass of water. Looks like I owe you an apology, my friend. Reagan wiped the wine off his beard. I thought you'd drop from 1 shot, since you're thin, soft, and you have no beard. Didn't expect you to be a decent drinker. You drink fast, so you're a good guy, Roy. Wait, what does that have to do with my personality? Roy shook his head, baffled by the dwarf's mindset. He pretended to wipe his lips. I have a favor to ask, Reagan. Reagan's eyes widened in surprise as he thought of something, and he refused solemnly. You can't buy my soul with 1 barrel of wine. I have principles. Mount Carbon forbids women from marrying outsiders. We can't get a match for you here. It's against our principles, so give up. Barney arched his eyebrow, agreeing. Why? Yeah, we don't even have girlfriends ourselves. C. Can't let you be I in the lead. Oh, you're still single. All of you. Roy hit the bullseye, and the dwarves fell silent. You're wrong. Barney knows a nice lady. If he would just stop being a pussy and ask her out, we'd already be uncles by now. Yep, they're still single all right. 50.6, 50.7, 50.8, and 50.9. They're almost the same age. So, they just came of age, huh? Relax. I'm not going to marry anyone here. It'd be great if you could teach me more about the crossbow during my stay here though, Reagan. Your tip back at the archery range helped me out a lot. Reagan burped, surprised about the request. You want me to train you? Drew, the shortest of them all, quickly asked, did you hear anything about him from anyone? Did I say anything wrong? No. Just saying you have a great eye for mentors. Drew gave Dave a look, and Dave's eyes gleamed with respect for Reagan. Aside from being the 3-time reigning champion of Mount Carbon in archery, Reagan is also Paul Darba's brother. And Paul was a part of the dragon hunting team along with Yarpen Zygrin. They hunted down Murtabrak and looted precious gems from its treasure trove. There are sapphires that are bluer than the deep blue sea, and diamonds the size of cherries. The more he said, the prouder the dwarves looked, and Roy's heart skipped a beat. Shit. I'm just trying to get some helpers. I never expected them to be associated with Yarpen. He didn't know who Paul was, but he knew Yarpen. Many years ago, Yarpen Zygrin hunted down Murkdebrak, the Green Dragon, alongside Geralt of Rivia and Yennefer of Vengerberg. The hunt ended up being a failure, for Valentertenmirth the Golden Dragon had saved Murkdebrak and her daughter halfway through. Even so, Yarpen managed to lead his team to safety, and that was testament to his strength. My answer lies in the wine. Regan smiled. You'll have to keep drinking if you want the answer. Then he finished another shot. Roy looked around at the tipsy dwarves and thought he could probably get them to become his allies. He drank another shot and asked, have you heard about the murders around the mountain? Regan's eyes glazed over for a moment, and then he flew into a rage. Everyone and their mother in Mount Carbon knows about that. That damned murderer ruined 4 families. He'd better pray we never cross paths, or I'm going to shoot his head. Then he told Roy formally, oh, and don't tell this to any outsider. Roy shrugged. Sure, I get it. But do you know anything about the victims? Like if there's something special about them, or if there are any similarities? Similarities? Not exactly. Elder Brovar doesn't tell us much. Regan wiped the wine off his beard. He had no answer to that, so he looked to his companions, but Drew and Dave were equally perplexed. Surprisingly, Barney clapped his hands. Oh, there is. Adrian and Fuller both worked in the F.5th mining area. Kerwin Hoger is in charge of that place. 2 of the victims worked in the 5th mining area. Roy seemed to catch on to something. 2 of them. They're from the H.hunting team A. and the patrol team. How many mining areas do you guys have? 15. That's a lot, but the Leshen picked 2 from the 5th mining area. Roy was surprised. Is this just a coincidence? 2 deaths under Kerwin's supervision. That's one big mistake. Doesn't he need to bear any responsibility? As if, Dave interjected, a look of disdain showing on his face. He whispered, that fucker's mediocre, but he knows how to lick his boss' shoe, so no surprise he doesn't need to be punished. He's always trying to butter Elder Brovar up. Thanks to his bootlicking, he managed to become the patrol captain of the mining area, and Elder Brovar's super soft on him. He tasked Kerwin with the job of hunting down the murderer. Kerwin just came of age, and he has no experience or skill. He can't be the captain. The murderer picked 2 of his underlings to kill because Kerwin's easy. Then he huddled closer to Roy and whispered, you know, there's a rumor going around among us sentries. Kerwin's not really Elder Brovar's nephew. We think Kerwin might be his illegitimate son. Oh, keep this a secret, will you? Alright, Dave, that's quite enough. Are you getting drunk even before you've had anything to drink? Say one more word of nonsense and I'll boot you out of the Mahakams. Kerwin of the 5th mining area. Roy pondered on something, and then he recalled how harsh Kerwin was to him when they first met. Does Kerwin hate humans? Or is he at least prejudiced against them? The dwarves shook their heads. We're not sure about that. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 63. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 63. Skoya Tale, TL. Osaka, PR. Ash. A few rounds later, Regan got more tipsy, and Roy's questions became more random, as if they were irrelevant to his mission. Dwarves weren't the only race to live in the Mahakams, right? I heard gnomes used to live here too, but I didn't see a single one after I came in. Why is that? Gnomes were the most ancient race to have ever lived. They were shorter than dwarves and better blacksmiths than them. Yeah, We had gnomes quite a while back. They're small, and their attitude is bigger than a dragon. But their metallurgy and blacksmithing are top-notch. Reagan pinched his beard as he walked down memory lane. But they moved to Tyr Tochair from what I heard. It's their real base. I don't know why they did, but maybe Elder Brovar does. Well, that's a shame. Looks like I have to postpone my visit with the gnomes. Oh, right. Have you ever left Mount Carbon, you guys? Have you ever seen the outside world? Nothing good out there. Dave shook his head in disdain. Mount Carbon has better wine, weapons, and women. And leaving this place means losing my house. As if I can get a wife without a place to live. I'm not going out, ever. There you go, speaking in absolutes again. Reagan put his mug down, longing sparkling in his eyes. I'll be venturing out when I'm 60. That's a few years from now. I'll seek Paul out and train with Yarpen. If I can make a name for myself, I'll have any woman I want when I come back. Drew nodded, and he changed his goal from wine to women. However, Barney frowned and objected. I doubt it's dangerous out there. There are bandits, humans, and Scoia'tael. Reagan quickly covered his mouth, and Drew and Dave looked shocked. That was the second time Roy had heard about Scoia'tael, the first being his talk with Seville. Seville was Elder Brovar's nephew and the wine dealer in Aldersburg, so Roy wasn't surprised he knew about Scoia'tael, since he must have had a lot of sources. But Barney's just a small fry here, so where did he hear about that? He sipped some wine, but this time, he didn't cheat, and his face turned red the moment he swallowed it. Then he continued the conversation. Have you guys ever seen anyone from Scoia'tael? What's that? Reagan shook his head. Oh, you must be hearing things, my friend. Let's drink. Scoia'tael, Schmia'tael, am I right? You can talk straight to me, you know, Roy said, half-joking. I hail from Lower Posada in Edirn. Ever heard of that place? Dol Blathana is east of that. I know a group of elves live there, and they see humans as their nemesis because of an ancient grudge. They'd attack us any chance they got. Lie, cheat, steal, rob. That's the least they can do to us. They're some extreme guys, and they rallied behind an elven sorceress, forming an organization. That organization came to be known as Scoia'tael, because they have squirrel tails attached to them, and have the same tattoo. Scoia'tael's ultimate goal was to erase all the humans in the north and create their own nation. One that was free of the humiliation of the humans. Most of the non-human races in the north were treated with contempt in the slums, especially elves, half-elves, and part-elves. Because of that, more and more non-humans and part-humans joined the organization and raised a flag of rebellion. Aside from elves, they managed to get some dwarves to join too. You're young, but you know more than you should for your age. Reagan let Barney go, and Barney gasped for air, sticking his tongue out. Well, Witchers tend to know more than the common man. Roy smiled. Witchers aren't human to a certain extent, so you don't have to hide anything from us. Reagan thought about it for a while before answering. Like most of the dwarves here, we've never seen any Scoia'tael members. Since their actions go against the rules Elder Brovar has established, they'd be severely punished the moment they'd be found out. Anyone associated with Scoia'tael would be exiled. In other words, Elder Brovar is siding with the humans, unlike the elves in Scoia'tael, Roy postulated. No, he's neutral. Scoia'tael's banned here because they're trying to get everyone to subscribe to their crazy ideology. On the other hand, humans can be reasoned with. Reagan burped. That's all I know. Now let's drink. Since Reagan refused to talk about it, Roy didn't force him to. 20 shots later, Reagan Dalba plopped on the table and snored, while Roy was still sober, his eyes gleaming. So, I guess this is my win then, my friends. Whoa, even Reagan lost. Seems like we underestimated you. Dave looked at Roy's belly in shock, since it showed no change even after downing 20 shots. Weird. Then he blurted, "Do you have some sort of dimension pocket in there?" Roy's heart skipped a beat, and he thought Dave had noticed something. Just kidding. Dave shook his head. A promise is a promise. Reagan's crossbow is now yours. But it looks like you haven't had enough fun yet. My turn now. I'll make sure you run for the potty, Dave said. Roy looked around, noticing that the dwarves were raring to go. Why not? Witchers can drink a ton after undergoing their mutations. I'll show you what I'm made of. An hour later, 3 dwarves were snoring in the cave. The only ones still awake were Roy and Barney, though his face was red, and he was almost drunk. Barney, the guys say you're stupid and stutter a lot, but you're obviously the smartest of them all. Good eye. Surprisingly, Barney didn't stutter after he got drunk. Reagan might have never seen any Scoia'tael members, but I bet you have. Roy's eyes gleamed. Nope. Not in the past year. He burped, his face getting redder. They hung out with bandits and beasts in the mountain's depths in the past. The whole mountain's on the lookout for them. The mountain's depths. You mean the forest here? Roy's voice trembled as he recalled the conversation he'd had with Letho the night before. He wanted an answer, but Barney grinned toothily, and then the dwarf fell asleep. Roy peered at the dwarves and shook his head. Then he took Blood Brothers out and placed it in front of Reagan before leaving the cave. The crossbow meant a lot to Reagan, and since he helped Roy out, Roy didn't want to take his stuff away. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 64. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper scans Chapter 64. Report, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash. On the other hand, Letho took Kerwin to Svanther to investigate. The winds were chilly in the north, and Svanther's chief was shivering at the entrance. When he saw Kerwin approaching, Cassius quickly bowed with a smile, looking like a lapdog that was welcoming its master. Welcome to Svanther, Mr. Kerwin. You honor us with your appearance. He then led the duo into the village. When Kerwin went past him, he warmly shook his hand. Kerwin gave a simple shake before pulling his hand back, and then Letho saw Kerwin wipe his hand on his shirt in disgust. Cassius smiled sycophantically, and also nervously. Sir, do you have good news for us? Is the murderer captured? Are you doubting us, Cassius? Kerwin glared up at Cassius. Even though he was only at Cassius' chest, Kerwin looked like a giant who was looking at an ant in disdain. Cut the crap. This is Letho, the Witcher we hired. He has some questions for you, and I want you to answer all of them honestly. Oh, of course. We won't let you down. Cassius turned around to see who the Witcher was, and he had a weird look on his face when he saw Letho. That guy's the oddball who refused our request. Heh, he said no to us so easily, but now he's still doing it. Cassius smiled, feeling smug, as if he were saying, so what if you said no to us? You ended up taking it anyway. So Witchers are nothing but the dwarves' lapdogs after all. He stood up straighter, thinking he was better than Letho, though he was just delusional. The dwarves saw the villagers as scum, the villagers saw Witchers as scum, and the dwarves respected the Witchers. It was a weird circle, but Letho paid no mind to it. Is everyone home right now? Cassius looked at Kerwin, and Kerwin nodded. Yes. Everyone's here, except those who are working in the mines. They're scared of the phantom. No wait, they're scared of that thing, so they're staying put. Go with Kerwin for now. I'll walk around the village to investigate. I'll get back to you if I need any more answers. Letho scanned the stone houses around him and went around the village, observing the women, children, and elderly inside. Another day had passed, and Letho and Roy finished their work for the day. That night, they sat in the guest room, talking about their findings. Did you get anything in Svanther? I checked everyone, but I got nothing. Letho didn't seem surprised. Including the ones in the mines. If Cassius was telling the truth, then I've seen everyone today. Nobody has come into contact with the Leshen, and we destroyed the second totem today. Letho rubbed his chin, looking surprised. But weirdly enough, the Leshen didn't send any beasts after us today and just let us do what we did. That's bizarre. By all accounts, it should be retaliating fiercely right now. That's good news though. The weaker it is, the higher our chances of victory. Roy recalled what happened that morning and smiled. I found something today too. Let's see what you got. Did you find a clue about the marked one? Letho was curious. No. That's one cunning fellow for sure. I got nothing on that. Roy paused. But I noticed something off about the case. A dwarf friend of mine told me 2 of the dwarves that died came from the 5th mining area, and the one in charge of that place is Kerwin, the one who's helping you in this case. You think he's a spy? Letho closed his eyes and shook his head. No. He doesn't have the mark, and he helped me destroy the totems. A believer wouldn't desecrate the totem, but since you brought this up, I'll look into it. Roy continued. Remember what you said last night about the forces that were helping the Leshen? I have some clue about that. That's fast, boy. Letho looked surprised. Who did you get it from? Remember the first dwarves we met? I got along with them, and I think they can be trusted, because they aren't the scheming type. Roy smiled at the thought of the dwarves' drunk look. Wine's their weakness, and since Brovar said I could have all the wine I wanted, I used that to my advantage. I can't use Axii, so this is all I can do, and they let Scoia'tael slip when they got drunk. Roy turned solemn. Do you know anything about this organization, Letho? Letho frowned. I spend most of my time in the south, so I never heard anything of the sort. Is it a new organization? It hasn't been long since their establishment. Roy gave it some thought before explaining, Scoia'tael's made up of some extreme guys. They despise humans, and most of their members are elves or part humans. They're trying to gain more allies, and their main targets are the ancient races, like dwarves, gnomes, or halflings. Anyone that hates humans are their potential allies. They mainly move around Dol Blathana and anywhere the ancient races are. If what you're saying is true, then they might be setting their eyes on everyone in Mount Carbon. Letho mumbled, they might try to recruit the dwarves. Yes, and Elder Brovar, in all his years of ruling the mountain, has remained neutral, coexisting with humans peacefully. Roy said, he will never allow an extremist group like Scoia'tael to take root here, so he's their enemy. Roy was reminded of Vernon Ryan, the one who died in a wine barrel. He'd noticed the squirrel tail tattoo on Vernon's heel when he checked, so he knew the revolutionists' leader was a member of that extremist group. Since they have members in Aldersburg, they probably have some here too. The Mahakams isn't that far from Aldersburg. If the Leshen's goal is to take control of the mountain, then that means Brovar is its enemy too. Roy's eyes shone. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, huh? I see. So Scoia'tael is helping the Leshen in the dark. That's why it could attempt that large-scale conspiracy. If I can make one more guess here, I would say Scoia'tael brought that Leshen here in the first place. Leshen was also called Spriggan. In a way, it was the protector of forests, so it'd kill the people who destroyed forests and nature. There were also those who were exceptionally close to nature among the elves, like Queen of the Fields, Dana Meb. It was possible for Scoia'tael to work with the Leshen using that kind of member. That's a possibility, Letho concurred. But you can't convince anyone before finding any evidence that Scoia'tael has infiltrated the Mahakams. We have to prepare for the worst, so we should tell Brovar about this, Roy insisted. At least we would have done our part in preparing for whatever that could happen. Letho gave it some thought. Fine, we'll do it your way. Meet Brovar tomorrow morning and tell him about this. I'll go on with my investigation. Don't want anyone to find out about our discussion. CENV. The next morning came, and Brovar sat on his black throne in the depths of the forge hall, caressing his beard as he stared at the boy before him majestically. The chamber shone resplendently, but all the guards had been dismissed, leaving only him and Roy in it. Where did you hear that name, boy? Brovar's voice was gruff and gravelly, his face trembling, and he sounded upset. Did those drunken brats tell you about it? I told everyone to keep this a secret. They're getting it from me, letting this secret slip. No, they didn't tell me anything, Elder Brovar, Roy quickly clarified, since he didn't want to drag Reagan and his friends into the mess. I've heard about Scoia'tael before coming to the Mahakams. Ask Seville if you don't trust me. I talked to him about it when I was in Aldersburg. Roy told Brovar the same thing he told Reagan and his friends. Fine, I'll trust you for now. But I'll clarify it later, Brovar murmured. But it is impossible for Scoia'tael to infiltrate Mount Carbon. It's preposterous. I've exiled those extremists and their supporters a year ago. Until this day, not a single one of them has been spotted by the patrol members or the residents here, or I would have heard about it. Brovar waved Roy down, the red silk of his robe billowing in the air. Your conjecture is nothing but a byproduct of your over-imagination. Never bring this up again. He continued. Since the Les Hen is the killer here, your job is to find it, kill it, and bring it as a trophy to me. That's also the Witcher's job. But you came here out of the kindness of your heart, and that must be rewarded, Brovar said warmly. If you have any request, you may speak up now. Roy rubbed his fingers together, and doubt crossed his mind. What is he trying to say? Why am I getting rewarded when he doesn't believe me? But he spoke up anyway. Your Excellency, I request for the freedom to travel to and from Mount Carbon, as well as some skilled bodyguards. It's best if they've also gained your trust. His investigation would anger the Scoia'tael members if they were found to be lurking in Mount Carbon. Since Letho was out for his investigation during daytime, he needed some bodyguards to keep him safe. Brovar agreed to it readily. As you wish. I'll announce this to everyone. You're free to explore anywhere you want, including the mines. But you can't enter the forbidden places, no matter what. As for the bodyguards you want, Brovar placed his chin on the back of his hand. Take Reagan and his gang with you. I'll relieve them of their duties in the patrol team for the time being. They'll be under your command for now. Roy stopped breathing for a moment. Assisting him during the investigation could be dangerous, and he didn't want to bring harm to his friends. Can I ask for other people, Your Excellency? They love to drink with you, don't they? Brovar shook his head in refusal. Then I'll grant their wish. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 65. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 65. Interrogation, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, Reagan, his companions, and Roy met up again in the bathhouse. Are you insulting me? The dwarves were surrounding Roy, washing the dirt off their legs. You won the match last night, so why did you give this back? You think I'm a sore loser? We are no sore losers. Reagan, since I won the match, that means I'm the crossbow's owner. Roy was tense and serious. So I reserve the right to give it to someone better. Why that you're giving this to me? Reagan pointed at him with his pudgy finger, at a loss for words. A while later, he sighed. You don't have to do this, you know. It's your liquor, after all. Take it as a token of friendship. Elder Brovar did say you guys will be going around with me for the next few days. Any more wine then? Dave licked his lips. If the chance comes, let's just say you can fill yourself with all the wine you want. We're friends from now on, Roy. Dave smacked Roy in excitement, and Roy almost teared up from the pain, his skin turning red. Alright, let's talk business. The elder wants you guys to help me out with the murders, Roy whispered. They formed a circle, and Roy planned on telling them a few things, since they were already a team. I need some help. Have you ever seen anyone with a weird tattoo on them? What kind of tattoo? Shoo, pipe down. Roy showed the marking of an antler overlapping a spider web to the dwarves and scanned their faces, but to his disappointment, they looked baffled, obviously never seeing that mark before. What does this mark mean, Roy? Why are you looking for it? Reagan shook his head. Elder Brovar thinks beards and chest hair are enough to show manliness, so there's no need for nonsense like tattoos. That's why we never advocate that here, and not even 1 in 100 of us has tattoos. Oh, but those who've left the mountain love it though. I've seen every guy's body here, but I've never seen this tattoo on them. Dave, Drew, and Barney expressed the same sentiment. I see. But keep an eye out for me, and keep this a secret. Of course. If I ever let this slip, I'll never have any wine again. Same thing here. Me too. On the other hand, a gray-haired, muscular dwarf slid into the bath as the dwarves made their promise, and he looked up as he wiped himself off. The night shifters usually come in later. I wonder who that guy is. Roy shifted his attention to the newcomer. The dwarf's face was sagging, his sunspots apparent. The laugh lines beneath the sides of his nose were deep, and the creases on his forehead also drooped. If Roy converted his age to a human's, the dwarf would be around 50 to 60 years old. And then Roy's eyes turned dark for a moment. Benson Fugner. 150 years old, no buffs or debuffs, normal stats, and normal skills. Is that old chap over there a miner? The dwarves looked at Benson. Dave, Drew, and Reagan tried their hardest to remember, while Barney looked smug. I might stutter, but I have a good memory. I recognized you first, why you know? Get to the point, mate, Roy said. Alright then. Barney gazed at the old dwarf with respect. Mr. Benson Fugner is 150 this year. He's about the same age as Elder Brovar, but he's a nice guy, and he doesn't put up airs. All the miners love him. Dwarves might live long lives, but dwarves that could live for more than 120 years in a time where wars and disasters were rife were rare. Why is he still working as a miner then? Shouldn't he be enjoying life? Roy asked. Barney puffed his chest. As long as we can move, we must work. If we don't work, there's no food on the table. Roy shot another question, what's his job then? The 5th mining area C. Clerk. He's in charge of the schedule. The area Kerwin's in charge of, huh? Roy replied, and at the same time, Benson did something weird. He hugged his legs out of nowhere and started wailing, his cries filling the bathhouse. Barney, the most sensitive out of them, teared up and sobbed. Why is he crying? Did his family die in the murders or something? Reagan answered that in Barney's place, no, his family's alive and kicking, and he just got a grandchild not too long ago. He sounded envious. His son's worse off than I am, so I wonder how on Mahakams he managed to marry the woman he loved and bore 2 children on top of that. Elder Brovar even baptized his kids as an acknowledgement for their contribution. Dwarves were not as fertile as humans, so having 2 children was a great contribution to the tribe. That's a great honor, and it hasn't been too long since then, so why is he looking so depressed? Did something happen to the kids? Reagan frowned, feeling perplexed. On the other hand, Roy finally had a breakthrough. I've been staking out at this place for days. Finally someone's acting weird. I need to look into this. Barney, shouldn't you go up there and calm him down? He's your elder, after all. Barney scratched his head in confusion, but then he thought Roy had a point, so he didn't retort. Be casual, okay? Barney was reluctant. Why don't you keep telling me to pull stupid things like this off? Mr. Benson watched over you guys, didn't he? Shouldn't you talk to him? At least show some gratitude for his guidance. Alright, fine. I get it. A short while later, Roy got some information from Barney. He's reminiscing about the past because he's getting on in age. Benson couldn't hold it in because he was thinking about the comrades who died on the battlefield, huh? Is that really the case? Guys, take me to his place. Black Metal Inn was the only inn in Mount Carbon that was approved by the elders, so it was usually packed. But because of the murders that had happened lately, the men would stay at home when night fell to take care of their families. Because of that, the inn's business was impacted heavily. The inn was brightly lit as usual that night, but only a few customers were inside. One of them was a gray-haired dwarf in yellow pajamas drinking alone in the corner. He would occasionally look up, turning sober for a moment and looking around nervously, as if worried something might happen. On the other hand, Letho and Roy were sitting beside the window. You can't be asking me out at this hour just for some wine, can you? I have some important information here. Letho deftly shaved his stubble using his short sword. Remember what you told me last night? Yeah, I looked into it and discovered Kerwin's secret. It's a big one. Put that aside for now. Roy calmed down and patted Letho's hand. One problem at a time. Keep an eye on the dwarf right there. Roy glanced at the target nonchalantly and whispered, don't let him catch you. Anything suspicious about him? Letho gulped some dwarven liquor, and he squinted from the strong kick of the alcohol. That dwarf is Benson Fugner, a clerk working in the 5th mining area. He's in charge of the miners' schedule. He bawled like a baby in the bathhouse today. Never saw anyone doing that before. Roy sighed. He's the only one who's been acting weird, so maybe he knows something. Worth a try. Letho put his mug down and gave Roy a look of approval. Good job. Never overlook anything out of place. You never know what you might find if you look into it. Roy shrugged. But his lips are sealed. Not even my friends manage to get anything from him, let alone outsiders like us. You'll have to be more, I don't know, Witcher.y about it. The clock in the inn struck midnight, and Benson got up drowsily. He wiped the wine from his lips, shook his head, and went out. Mount Carbon was freezing at night, and one kiss from the wind was enough to turn the wine on his beard to ice. Even his nose turned red from it, but he didn't care about it. Benson trudged ahead to the steps leading to his cave, not unlike a soulless puppet. He dragged himself to the dark, narrow alley behind the inn and looked up at the moon that was nearly full. It's nearly the full moon. Benson took a deep breath, his eyes filled with fear, his lips trembling. He fell into a trance, as if he'd seen something terrifying, and then the moon turned red before his eyes, screams of agony piercing the air around him. And then Benson felt something on his shoulder, so he snapped out of it only to be greeted by someone he'd never met before. The man before him was bald, had sculpted features, a pointed jaw, deep-set eyes, and a distant look. Benson also saw a part of a sword on the man's back. He staggered backward. And you are? The man grinned toothily. Sorry, he said. And then a chill ran up Benson's spine, sobering him up, but before he could do anything, an illusion played before his eyes. Letho's fingers split into dozens and hundreds of tentacles, surrounding him, blocking his every route of escape. That's a whole lot of fingers for a Witcher. The dwarf's eyes lost their gleam and focus, and the Witcher mumbled something to him. Benson Fugner, you would cry in the bathhouse alone and numb yourself with liquor in the inn. I know the cause of that. It's from the secret you're keeping, isn't it? You bury it deep in your heart, never telling anyone, not even your family. But eventually, the secret starts to gnaw at your conscience. The guilt you feel is killing you, and not even the wine you consume can numb the pain. Benson started to look like he was in pain at that point. And now a listener comes up to you. He's just a traveler passing through Mount Carbon, and he holds his promise close to his heart. He can share your pain, and you won't have to risk getting found out. Tell him your secret. Tell all of it. Letho eventually stopped talking, and Roy, who was behind Letho, held his breath, staring at the dwarf unblinkingly. Benson was gritting his teeth, and the pain he showed turned into a struggle. He was fighting against himself, but eventually, he refused. I can't say it. That shocked Roy. He never knew anyone who could resist Axii, and that alone told him that Benson's sadness didn't come from old memories. Benson's 150 years old, so he's been through a lot, and his will is 6. That's 1 point higher than the average human. Since Benson was resisting, Letho went for a softer approach. Is someone threatening you? Benson looked up, his face contorted, but his mouth was still sealed. If they weren't careful, Benson might just crush all his teeth, and then Roy went up. Is someone threatening you with your grandchildren? Benson's eyes shot open, and he stared at Roy in horror. Yeah, it's probably the spy. Letho and Roy looked at each other. Since Benson was reluctant to answer some questions, Axii wouldn't work as well as they'd hope. However, that didn't mean they couldn't get any answers, since Benson's reaction could tell them a few things. Letho told Roy to keep on asking. Did you bump into something by chance in the 5th mining area? Did that spy threaten you with your family? Is he working for the murderer? Were the dwarves from the 5th mining area killed because of him? Will a new victim appear tomorrow? Is it someone from the 5th mining area, or somewhere else? The answers from the dwarf shocked Letho and Roy. What the hell is this? Roy muttered. After the last question was asked, Letho snapped his finger to dispel Axii and escaped the scene with Roy quickly. A few moments later, Benson snapped out of it groggily. He hugged himself and scanned his surroundings in terror. I seem to have forgotten something, but what? Creepy. He shivered. Bless me, holy Mahakams. May I and my family get through this in peace. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 66. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 66. Drive away, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, we know when and where the Leshen will make its next kill. Roy was excited. Let's give it a whooping tomorrow. But Letho had to snap him back to reality. You're forgetting something, boy. The marked one hasn't been found as of yet, so it's useless, even if we kill it. But your tip yesterday helped out a lot. Letho patted his shoulder. Kerwin's not the marked one, nor is he the Lushan's believer. Even so, 2 dwarves from his mining area died, and he, for some reason, is hostile to you. That is out of place. Letho stopped for a moment. So I used Axii on him this morning and found out that he's been helping Scoia'tael this whole time. If his information is true, then there are 4 members hiding in Mount Carbon. That's all. Roy frowned. He thought there would be at least a few dozen of them. Most of the members lurking here were summoned back to Dol Blathanna for some reason, leaving only 4 to keep in touch with Kerwin as well as helping the Leshen build its totems, Letho explained. They didn't hunt us down because they didn't have enough people here. They'd be exposed if I somehow escaped their ambush, so they needed to be sure they could get me. Roy got the answer to his question. I see. And one of the members is the marked one, Letho said. Kerwin will meet up with them at the rendezvous point tomorrow night. The Leshen will kill at the same time too. Wow, they let one of them get marked. That's a bit cold. Roy was shocked to hear that. That means he's giving up his life for the Leshen. No wonder I couldn't spot him. He took a deep breath and inquired. But why does Kerwin want to help them? Elder Brovar treasures him a lot. That's as much as I can get out of him. Any more and he'd escape Axiai's grip. Letho stopped for a moment, and then he mocked, he just came of age, you know. 60 years old and all. Maybe he's helping Scoia'tael because he's in his rebellious phase. Teens do tend to disobey their elders, you know. He continued. Alright, we're going to complete this request soon. I'll be killing the less hen tomorrow. Letho had made the arrangements. While Kerwin leads you and your friends straight to the Scoia'tael members. Once you see the marked one, kill him, or the less hen will revive 1 hour after it is killed. Letho became a bit more solemn. Time is not on our side, so kill them all, but leave Kerwin alive if you can afford to. Roy nodded. Kerwin might have betrayed Brovar, but that doesn't mean Brovar's going to kill him. I'd keep him alive if I could. Don't tell anyone about this. If Kerwin somehow finds out about it, our plan will probably backfire, since this is his turf, after all. Keep this a secret between you, me, and your friends. Not even Brovar can know about this. Alright. If the less hen resurrects, and that's the worst case scenario, it'll be weakened for some time. If that happens, use the bomb and oil I gave you. Fire damages it lethally, Letho reminded Roy. The less hen and Scoia'tael will lay low after tomorrow night, unless we manage to drive them away. Or until their reinforcement comes. Tomorrow's our last chance to finish this. Letho's not scared even though he's facing the less hen alone. I have my friends backing me up, so kicking Kerwin and those Scoia'tael members' arses should be easy. Let's do it then. The full moon slowly rose into the night sky, but the trees flanking the path between the 5th mining area and Mount Carbon were shrouded in darkness, looking just like an eerie abyss. Anyone would wonder if they'd get ambushed by the horrors hiding in the dark. Suddenly, hasty footsteps were heard closing in on the path, and a moment later, a dwarf in a thick coat jogged into the dark path with nothing but an oil lamp illuminating his way. Buzz Ricky was one of the veteran miners in the 5th mining area, and he'd worked diligently for more than 10 years. He should have been working the night shift that night and only going back home in the morning. The recent murders in the night terrified everyone, so the miners would stay the night in the mines if they got off late, only going back home when it was dawn. However, his plan wouldn't go that smoothly. A guard came in to inform him about his wife's delivery, and Buzz must return to his family for the child's delivery, even if it was dangerous to go out at night. It was only a 30-minute journey from the 5th mining area to Mount Carbon, and there would be the occasional patrol going through the path, but for some inexplicable reason, the path was deathly quiet that night. A trail of shallow footsteps embedded themselves on the snow ground as Buzz jogged ahead, the mist he breathed out turning to ice on his beard. The mine was already a long way back, and he would be arriving in the valley after 10 minutes. All he could think about at that point was his wife, and nothing else. His panting became heavier, and the forest heard it. As if on cue, Buzz fell headfirst into the snow, and his oil lamp rolled away. Then a sharp stab of pain shot up from his calf. Buzz screamed into the night, and when he calmed down, Buzz looked down at his calf only to see a sharp arrow piercing his right calf. Blood drenched his hand when he touched the wound, and the snow was dyed crimson from his bleeding wound. "Come out, you bastard!" He looked around and yelled in horror. "You won't get away with this," he roared, but terror was starting to overwhelm him. Then he saw someone jump down from the tree beside the path. The moonlight and oil lamp illuminated her, revealing reddish-brown hair, sculpted features, pointed ears, a protruding jaw, and 2 rows of white, canine teeth. Buzz trembled, but he observed the elf closely, and finally, his eyes were glued to the accessory around her waist. It was yellow and made out of squirrel hide. Elf. No. You're a Scoia'tael elf. Is Scoia'tael behind all the murders? He'd heard rumors about Scoia'tael members hiding around Mount Carbon. waiting for the right time to topple Elder Brovar, and that rumor had spread like wildfire for some time. However, ever since everyone associated with Scoia'tael had been driven out a year ago, Elder Brovar had forbidden them from talking about the matter, and the rumors died. Buzz thought Scoia'tael had all been driven out too, but apparently, that wasn't the case. The elf didn't answer his question. She took her bow and arrow once more and aimed at Buzz. Buzz got up with difficulty, his face contorted with pain and terror. Elves were known for their aptitude in archery. He knew she could kill him easily, since he was injured and only 10 feet away from her. Looks like this is where I meet my end, dear Akali. In the end, I couldn't get to see you and our baby one last time. The frustration and hatred within him made Buzz roar, damn you, Scoia'tael. You shall all burn in hell. Just you wait. Elder Brovar and my brethren will avenge me. This is war. And I swear all of you will burn. Then he closed his eyes and waited for death to claim him. But the stab of pain didn't come, and he looked at the elf in shock. The elf turned her head to the left and gave him a look. What's that supposed to mean? Should I go left? The desire to live lit within him, but instead of following her orders, Buzz limped back the way he came. However, an arrow brushed past him before he could get far, and it drew blood. What do you want? He was infuriated, thinking the elf was playing with him, but the elf was still only telling him to go left. Fine. I'll play along as I can live to see my baby. Buzz decided to follow the elf's orders. He would swallow his pride if it meant he could live. He dragged himself to the left, and blood trickled down his pants, leaving a crimson trail on the ground. The pain from his right calf was still unbearable, but he didn't do anything about the arrow that pierced him. All he could do was moan, but eventually, his whole leg went numb. The moment he entered the forest, he was engulfed by the darkness, and the terror within him grew 10 times larger. He had a feeling something horrifying had set its eyes on him. The elf was holding the oil lamp and was following him. He wanted to escape, but the elf had her eyes on him, and he didn't make any sudden movements. Where are we going? He asked, but no answer came, and so, all he could do was walk ahead. Buzz trudged on, covering a long, long distance. He kept losing blood, and the chilly winds buffeted him, draining all his color away. He could feel himself turn cold, his limbs stiffening, and his vision blurred. He suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around, but the elf was nowhere to be seen. However, before he could rejoice, a long, ancient sigh echoed around him, sending a chill up his spine. Buzz finally broke down from the pressure. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 67. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 67. Hard Battle, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, the earth seemed to have come to life, and it started rumbling. The snow on the trees started falling, and the trees bowed, as if welcoming their master. And then a dark, narrow path was revealed. To Buzz's horror, 2 wrinkly, wooden hands held the trunks, or to be precise, the hands were made out of countless intertwining vines. The hands pushed themselves back, revealing a gigantic being kneeling behind the path. A deer. The creature's head was as big as an average adult human, with a pair of gigantic antlers protruding from the sides of its head. Each of the antlers looked like the branches of a tree, and they were intertwined. Its face was as long as a deer's, but it had no flesh on it, not even on its snout, and only a mere skull remained. Eerie flames seemed to dance in its eye sockets, sending fear into those who saw them. Its torso and limbs were made of tree trunks and vines, covered by a layer of fern. The monster took a step forward, and its face was just a few feet away from Buzz, its 10-foot height blocking everything in Buzz's sight. The less hen was one with the darkness, spreading darkness, fear, and death to its surrounding. Buzz's hairs stood on end, and he trembled, feeling suffocated. It took all his head to blurt out, "What the hell are you?" The less hen growled, its voice grating. Before Buzz could say another word, the less hen raised its gigantic hand and slammed it downward. This is it. Buzz closed his eyes in despair, but then a gust of wind howled behind him, and a deafening boom surrounded him. He heard an inhuman gasp of pain, and the monster pulled its hand back, and someone appeared beside Buzz. He looked small compared to the less hen, but for some reason, Buzz thought he was infallible. Letho! Buzz roared in excitement, and he started crying. He was about to die a moment ago, but then he'd found out he was still alive. It was a harrowing experience to say the least. Be quiet. Letho stood before the dwarf, his face filled with black veins thanks to the potion he had, and he held his short swords before his chest, yellowish oil and crimson blood gleaming on them. The blood belonged to the elf who'd led Buzz to his would-be death. The less hen was 20 feet away from Letho. Letho could smell the scent of soil and grass from it, but also the faint stench of blood. His necklace started humming, and the ground pulsed, as if a creature's tongue was trying to coil around its prey. A vine whipped upward from the snow and tried to wrap them, not unlike how a python would. There was a stench emanating from it, and Buzz started shouting for help. Letho sliced the vine, cutting it in half, and green fluid oozed from it. The broken vine squirmed on the ground like a sliced worm. Don't just stand there and scream, you fool. Take this. Buzz scrambled to take the knife Letho tossed him, and he smiled wryly. You want a limp like me to fight that with this little knife? But he couldn't complain, for the less hen had started howling, and dozens of vines were crashing toward them like a waterfall. Letho grabbed Buzz and rolled away, but the vines didn't stop chasing them, and soon, they were surrounded. Eventually, the vines formed a cocoon, trapping Letho and Buzz within it. The less hen sighed, and then it went ahead and held the cocoon within its slender, wrinkly hand. And it gripped it. The cocoon that was made out of countless vines started squirming as the lichen's grip became tighter, and it turned smaller and smaller. Sounds of things rubbing against each other came from within the cocoon, and then a crack was heard. The less hen took an involuntary step back, and if its face still had flesh on it, it would have looked horrified. The weird sound kept going on, until the cocoon suddenly stopped contracting, and the vines started trembling, murmuring into the night. They were shivering in fear, as if they'd encountered a predator. The less hen watched quietly, and then a beam of light shone from within the cocoon, and after that, the vines fell off, drying up and dying right away. Steam escaped from some of the vines, as if they were getting cooked. The less hen opened its arms, and the forearms turned into two sharp spikes. It tried to pierce the cocoon, but what greeted it was a whip of flame, though it only lasted for a moment. However, that moment was enough to make the less hen clutch its arms in agony and back off. Letho was kneeling on one knee, supporting himself with his sword. He was panting, his whole body red. Even though they escaped death, it took a toll on him. He was bleeding from his face, and his armor was broken, blood gushing out. Buzz was lying on the ground, life hanging on by a thread. Hamta, Morata, the less hen started chanting while Letho was catching his breath, then howls of wolves came from afar. Letho quickly made a sign in the air and sent a green beam flying straight at the less hen. The less hen was caught by surprise, and it was stunned for a moment, forcing it to stop chanting. Letho took the chance to hurl a bomb at it. The canister was smashed into pieces, and white smoke with black particles in it enveloped the less hen, blocking its magical flow and its connection with nature. The less hen howled and quickly backed out of the smoke. Letho crossed his short swords, creating sparks in the air, and then he pounced on the less hen. Buzz was still lying on the ground, and never once did he expect to see a witcher fighting a monster up close in his life. The lichen's magic had been sealed once the Dimeritium bomb had been set off, and it could only engage in close-quarter combat with Letho. It was like seeing David fight Goliath, except David was a witcher, and Goliath was a less hen. It looked funny, but dangerous at the same time. The less hen had incredible strength and was invincible. Its every attack left a crater in the ground, but since it lost its magic, it became the prisoner in a prison it created. It was as if the less hen was constricted by a shirt too small, and it couldn't exert its full strength. It'd clumsily hit the pine trees from time to time, wasting energy for nothing. On the other hand, the Witcher, while big in the dwarf's eyes, had astounding speed. He moved around as if there were wings on his legs, evading the Lichen's claws by a hair's breadth at times. Whenever the less hen tried to go around Letho to attack Buzz, Letho would force it to retreat with Igni. Letho was a cunning and cautious fighter. He'd retreat after every strike with his short sword, not giving it any openings. That was how snakes hunted. His short swords acted like fangs, biting into the less hen and poisoning it whenever he saw an opening. Then he'd hide behind the trees. Vipers had lethal venom, and Letho's venom was the oil and poison on his short swords. The less hen had a tough hide, so the stabs wouldn't damage it too much, but all Letho needed to do was scrape its skin, then his oil and poison would invade the Lichen's body, corroding and destroying it that way. If someone saw the fight from afar, they'd see a titan roaring in the forest, while someone was swirling around it like a phantom. 2 minutes of intense battle later, the less hen had accumulated countless injuries, and green blood oozed from them. Letho was hit twice, and blood trickled down his cheek. His right arm was mangled and hung limply at his side. Even so, he showed no panic or frustration. He cast one final Igni and threw the flames at the gigantic monster, and then he took a deep breath and put his short sword down. A moment later, green blood spurted from the Lichen's countless wounds, and it fell like a boat that was sinking because of the countless holes in its hull. Letho watched closely as the giant fell with a rumbling thud. It lay on the ground, spread-eagled, its chest heaving, and the light in its eyes dimmed. Letho uncorked a swallow and finished it in one gulp. A moment later, the wounds on his body stopped bleeding, but he still wouldn't take his eyes off the less hen. At the same time, he moved his right arm with his left to snap the bones back into place, giving it a semblance of an arm. He helped the heavily injured dwarf up and fed him a bottle of marigold potion. The bitter taste made Buzz frown, and he woke up. Is the monster dead, Letho? Did we survive? The dwarf could see that the less hen was almost dead, but the fatal hit hadn't been landed yet. Ash to ash, dust to dust. It was born in the woods, therefore it shall die in the woods. That is its fate, but it has to live, at least for a little while longer. And then Letho's face fell, for the less hen suddenly turned into a ball of smoke and disappeared into thin air. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 68. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 68. Ambush, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, let's turn the clock back by 5 hours. 4 dwarves and a human teenager were hiding behind a big tree in a snow-capped land, staring at a path before them. 2 of them had crossbows on their backs, while the other ones had 2-handed weapons with them. We've been here for half an hour, Roy. You sure Kerwin's coming out? Reagan caressed his freezing beard, looking bored, and the other dwarves listened closely. Roy breathed into his hands to warm himself. Patience, my friends. I got this from a reliable source. Roy injected some fear in his reply. Since we have time, let's review our plan. Kill those Scoia'tael scum, Drew started. Capture Kerwin. Barney clenched his fists in excitement. Dave scratched his head, apparently not knowing what to say. Safety first. We'll make a run for it if we can't beat them. Roy's fingers were getting white with nerves, his heart palpitating. Go with the flow, Reagan. If the less hen somehow revives when we're fighting, remember to throw some fire at it. Even though Letho said there were only 4 members, Roy couldn't be too sure about it, since they didn't know much about the enemy. Got it, so relax. Reagan's face was getting red. Fuck it. I've been wanting to kick that a slicker in the balls for a while now. And then they held their breaths, for they saw someone come out of the mine. It was a dwarf with white hair and a white beard, and he was equipped with a hammer as well as an oil lamp. "He's here." They started tailing their quarry. The white-haired dwarf walked on the path filled with wheel tracks for 10 minutes before suddenly going into the forest that was flanking it. Roy and the dwarves were surprised by that, and they quickly followed. The moon was drowning the land in its silvery glow, and the snow ground was filled with trails of footsteps leading deep into the forest. A group of 5 friends traveled in the dark, silent forest, and Roy would etch the mark of the Viper School on a pine tree after walking for a certain distance. Half an hour later, their quarry led them to a dark cave. The white-haired dwarf suddenly put his index fingers in his mouth and let out a shrill whistle. A moment later, 2 silhouettes with torches in their hands came out to greet him. The dim light from the fire illuminated them, revealing their pointed ears, sharp chin, and slender, agile figure. The elf on the left was wearing a dark green jacket that covered his leather armor underneath. His boots looked old and were made out of deer hide. And he was equipped with a bow, quiver, and sword. The elf on the right had delicate features, fair skin, and had no visible weapons on her, though she had a rhombus-shaped talisman on her belt, and she was slimmer than her male counterpart. They placed their torches into the sconces on the wall and engaged in a quiet conversation with Kerwin. Roy and his friends couldn't hear anything because it was too soft, but the dwarves who were hiding behind the bush nearby looked excited. Barney even covered his mouth in case he made any sound, but his body was trembling in excitement. 2 elves. But there should be 4. Are they in the cave? But it's not a bad thing. Even if Kerwin is there, it shouldn't be too hard to defeat them. Roy heaved a sigh of relief and scanned the elves. Thoth age. 70 gender. Male status. Scoia'tael member HP, 60, marked, strength. 5 dexterity. 7 constitution. 6 perception. 7 will. 5 charisma. 6 spirit. 5 skill. Bow master level 5 1. Handed mastery level 5 elegance of the wind, passive. Elves possess extraordinarily elegant looks and great dexterity. Charisma +1, dexterity +1. Lydia age. 60 gender. Female status. Scoia'tael member, sorceress. HP, 50 mana. 150 strength. 4 dexterity. 6 constitution. 5 perception. 5 will. 6 charisma. 7 spirit. 15 skill. Source, passive. Has awakened the power to sense chaos energy. Now a magic-sensitive elf. Loved by the elements of earth, fire, water, and air. Absorbs mana automatically at all times. Can control mana and release spells after receiving professional and systematic training, performing feats most people couldn't. Magic trick level 5. The mildest and trickiest usage of elemental energy. Expends a small amount of mana to perform daily chores. Includes cleaning, bathing, copying, lighting, makeup, and more. Fireball level 3. Elementary level fire spell. No materials needed. Summons a fireball to attack after casting. Damage is dependent on skill level and spirit. Lightning bolt level 4. Elementary level air spell. No materials needed. Releases a bolt of lightning at target after casting. Damage is. Teleportation level 3. Heightened defense level 4. Elegance of the wind, passive. Oh shit. An elven sorceress. Roy gasped. This is going to be troublesome. She's a lot stronger than Toya is. I mean, look at all her skills. If she notices us and manages to prepare herself, she'll be throwing fireballs and lightning bolts at us left and right while her teammates cover her. We'll all die before getting close. Good thing I noticed her. She's worse than a normal human in terms of survivability if caught unprepared. Wait, the other elf is marked. Realization struck Roy, and he knew the male elf was their primary target, the key for the Lushan's revival. Show no mercy. Kill him when you have the chance. He recalled Letho's reminder and pointed at the male elf before pointing at himself. Then he pointed at the female elf and pointed 3 fingers at Regan, who was holding Blood Brothers. They loaded their crossbows and knelt down, aiming at their target's vitals. Roy activated crossbow mastery and aimed at the elf's heart, while Regan aimed at the female elf's neck. The other dwarves held their breath and watched silently as Roy whispered the countdown. 3, 2, 1, fire. 2 crossbow bolts flew across the air, slamming into their targets. The male elf who was chatting with Kerwin felt as if his chest had been hit by a sledgehammer, and he fell down with a contorted face as a bloody arrow pierced through his chest. Even though he'd hit his target, Roy looked dark, for he noticed the elf nudging ever so slightly to the side at the last moment. Because of that, the arrow didn't manage to pierce his heart, and the elf survived, but only just. Regan's shot was not much better than Roy's. In fact, it was much worse, for a white light covered her, deflecting the bolt before it could hit it. Garine! Garine! The female elf screeched in horror before darting back into the cave, hiding within the safety of the dark. Then she started chanting, and the pressure from her eerie magic hung over everyone's heads like a reaper's scythe. Kerwin Hoger charged at their hiding spot, his hammer trailing along with him, and his hair billowed in the wind. Drew, Dave, you guys take him on. Regan reloaded his crossbow. Roy, finish that Scoia'tael scum. Barney, you'll take care of that sorceress with me. Roy raised his crossbow and took out the bomb from his inventory. No, we'll take care of that sorceress first. That elf is just inches away from death. I'll deal with him later. The battle's tide started to turn, and a few moments later, Drew and Dave charged toward Kerwin with their hammer and great axe. Kerwin swung his hammer and barely deflected the weapons away, but he was forced backward, and he ran into the forest. At the same time, Roy quickly hurled the Dimeritium bomb into the cave, and the white smoke enveloped the sorceress. She suddenly let out a chilling scream as the magical fire in her hands was extinguished. The light that enveloped her shattered into pieces, and blood trickled down her eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Her magic backfired on her. Roy didn't hesitate to pull the trigger and buried an arrow into her eye. A moment later, the arrow pierced through her skull, sending chunks of flesh, blood, and gray matter flying everywhere. The sorceress fell back onto the ground and died, never getting the chance to cast any spell. The sorceress, Lydia, is killed. You gain 100 EXP, level 3, 110/1500. Whoa, a sorceress is worth 5 times more than a normal human. But that wasn't the time to think about that. He heard the howls of the wind coming from the cave, and a third Scoia'tael member showed up, holding a greatsword. He was obviously an elf, judging by his ears, but instead of having a slim body like his brethren, the elf with the greatsword was muscular and covered in dark, gray armor. His neck and left shoulder were exposed, and Roy could see a tattoo in the shape of green leaves, branches and vines sprawled on the elf's skin. His face contorted in rage and sadness, and he jumped out of the shadows the moment the sorceress had died. The elf swung his greatsword, aiming for Roy's chest. The gale that brushed past Roy suffocated him, but he managed to roll away, though he was a moment too late. However, the greatsword was blocked by a black hammer. Why don't you want to kill him? Oh, over my dead body. Barney's face was as scarlet as the setting sun, his eyes wide with fury. Barney slammed his leg against the elf's chest, sending him flying back into the shadows, and he swung his hammer down on the elf's head. I'm going in. There might be more of those scum inside. Regan went into the cave with his crossbow in hand. Only 10 seconds had passed since the first shot had been made, but only Roy and the marked elf were left, with the latter being near dead with a hole in his chest. Blood trickled down his mouth, and his face was contorted in rage, his green eyes filled with hatred. He bared his teeth at Roy, threatening to kill him, but to little effect. "I'm sorry." Roy couldn't understand why Scoia'tael hated humans so much, but he wouldn't spare them a shred of pity. He then grabbed a bolt out of thin air, but before he could do anything, a wrench was thrown in his plan. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 69. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 69. The Last Kill, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, an arm that looked like a tree's roots tore the elf's chest open, and it grabbed Roy's right hand. The dim light from the sconce illuminated them, revealing the crimson fluid on the arm, the ferns on it, and the tough husk that looked like it belonged to a root. Roy's heart skipped a beat, and he grabbed a bolt with his left hand and tried to stab the elf's ear, but the hand slammed him in the chest, sending him flying back. Roy tumbled down and rolled around, pain spreading from his chest, and it felt as if his insides had shifted. He struggled to sit up, and to his horror, the hand that had torn the elf's chest pushed against the ground, forcing the elf's body to sit up at a terrifying angle. As the moon's light sprinkled over the forest, the elf's body dislocated its jaw, and inside its mouth, an eye peered straight at Roy. A ball of cold flame danced inside it, a flame that was devoid of any life. A moment later, the elf that had sat up was torn in half, revealing the gigantic Leshen in its entirety. After the fight with Letho, the Leshen had shrunk to half its size, and it was only standing at 5 feet tall. Tiny antlers protruded from its head, and a mask made out of a white skull covered its face. Its eyes looked more like eerie blue lanterns, and looking at them sent a chill down Roy's spine. Its body and limbs were made out of tree trunks and vines, and they were covered in blood and bodily fluids. More than anything, it looked like a baby that just broke out of its mother's womb, albeit in a grotesque way. Ancient Leshen Age. 272 HP, 80, weakened, mana. 120 strength. 12 dexterity. 4 constitution. 8 perception. 5 will. 7 charisma. 12 spirit. 12 skills. Vine control level 6. Expends a small amount of mana to hasten the growth of seeds. Summons durable, strong, and fast vines to attack the target. Ground spike level 6. Elementary level earth spell. Expends a small amount of mana to attack the target with ground spikes. Beast summoning level 7. Charms nature's beasts with great charisma. The beasts can be summoned at any time to help the user. Camouflage level 7. The user may blend itself with the forest if in the required terrain. Allows the user to hide completely. Mark of the Leshen level 6. An ancient ritual of blood. A strengthening totem can be constructed after the necessary sacrifices are made. The Forest's Murmur level 7. The user can charm travelers who are lost in a forest, showing them an illusion, brainwashing them into devotion through great charisma. Child of the Woods, passive. The user is the guardian of forests and loved by nature. Nature blesses it as gratitude for its service. As long as the user is in a forest, its stamina, mana, and wounds would recover twice as fast. All the color drained from Roy's face after reading the details. This is an ancient Leshen. Wait, it's weakened. But it's still stupidly strong. It's the strongest monster I've seen until now. How am I supposed to fight it? Roy was about to hurl a dimeritium bomb at it, but he realized he used it in the fight against the sorceress. Shit. He cursed quietly and shot a bolt at the Leshen, but as expected, it got stuck in the monster's hide. Aside from drawing some blood, it did nothing. Leshens are afraid of fire. Letho's reminder rang in his head, and he quickly tossed a bottle at the Leshen, coating it in oil. The Leshen was still groggy from the recent resurrection, and it didn't stop Roy. But when Roy went for the torch on the wall, the less hen glared at him and put its hands together. Huntala, it chanted, and in the very next moment, a thick vine sprouted from the ground and pounced at Roy from behind, coiling his leg. Then it pulled Roy up, suspending him in midair, effectively taking him out of commission. The blood rushed to his head, stunning Roy, and everything around him spun. To his horror, the vine was already coiling around his whole body, turning him into a cocoon with nothing but his eyes exposed. He was also suffocating from the tightening vine around his neck, and then he was reminded of the nightmare he'd had before coming to Mahakam. That felt oddly similar. Was it trying to tell me about this? The less hen awkwardly stood up among the flesh and blood, and then it slowly went toward Roy. At the same time, 3 dwarves showed up behind the monster. Drew and Dave were dragging Kerwin along by his arms, and when they noticed the monster outside the cave, the dwarves held their weapon tensely. And when they saw Roy being suspended in midair, they flew into a rage and charged toward the less hen, abandoning their hostage along the way. The less hen was fully focused on Roy, obviously trying to do something to the boy, and so, it was oblivious to the dwarves' ambush. When the dwarves' great axe and hammer slammed into the less hen, it howled terribly and stumbled forward, but it didn't fall. However, the Lishan's tough body was injured, and green blood gushed from its wounds. The Lishan's howls turned into a guttural growl, and it whirled around, slamming the dwarves with its mangled arms. Even though the dwarves were stout and covered in heavy armor, they could move as nimbly as a calico could. They ran around the less hen once, and the moment the Lishan's attack was weakened, they held their weapons before their chest, blocking the attack. They followed their defense by moving their weapon downward, sliding across its arms, and sparks flew. A moment later, their weapons connected with the Lishan's chest and back, slamming hard into the monster. 2 giant cracks formed on the Lishan's body, and blood spurted. Nobody could see it, but Roy noticed the Lishan's HP taking a dip, leaving it with only 60 points. Roy tried to shout, but all he could do was let out a muffled scream, for the vines were still coiled around him. The dwarves' attack finally enraged the less hen, and it started chanting once again. It could cast spells at a terrifyingly faster speed compared to any normal sorcerer, and all it took was a split second for it to launch an attack. Most people would fail to find an opening under those circumstances. The dwarves thought they noticed the Lishan's weakness. It might have had great strength, but its reaction and movement speed were slower than a tortoise's. They circled it with their weapons in hand, their shadows almost a blur. The dwarves looked like a pair of hyenas hunting their prey down on a meadow, waiting for a chance to give the less hen another blow. However, unbeknownst to them, 2 vines shot up from the ground, ambushing them from below. The vines coiled around their feet and pulled them back, suspending them in midair. And then, just like Roy, they were turned into a cocoon, but the less hen wasn't as kind to them this time around. A cruel gleam shone within its eyes, and it raised its hands before putting it down. The dwarves were suspended further up into the air before slamming headfirst into the ground. A loud thud later, the vines uncoiled the dwarves, revealing Drew and Dave, who were out of commission. "Dave, Drew!" Roy shouted, but only muffled sounds came out, and he teared up. "God damn it!" An arrow soared through the air, hitting the less hen in the face, embedding itself into the mask. Reagan came out of the dark, but he looked like a mess. His hair was billowing in the air, and his right thigh was bleeding. He was obviously injured in the battle against the elves, but he showed no panic. After the shot hit its mark, he quickly reloaded his crossbow, ready for the next shot. The torch illuminated the cave, and Roy could see the shadow of a dwarf running toward them, and out came Barney, roaring and raring to fight. He swung his warhammer and slammed it into the Lishan's head. And it howled. 40 HP remaining. Mo, Ning, Ta, the less hen covered its face and directed its spell at Barney. The air was filled with the stench of soil, and as dust and debris flew into the air, a ground spike higher than 10 feet shot up from the ground, forming a wall before the less hen. Barney's attack was stopped, but he slammed into the wall, failing to stop himself in time. The ground rumbled, and Barney was taken out from the recoil. He let go of his warhammer, and it fell with a thud. The Les Hen blocked Regan's arrow with its hand, and then it summoned another vine to suspend him in midair. And with that, the battle was brought to an end. The ground was littered with corpses and the injured, and the only one standing was a relatively petite, bleeding Les Hen. An arrow was buried in its face, and its chest heaved as it panted. The Les Hen slowly came up to Roy, only to stare at him in silence. Roy smelled the scent of nature coming from it, but also the stench of blood and the soil. That's the smell of a graveyard. Roy closed his eyes and trembled reflexively. Every inch of his body, every vessel, and every vein shivered uncontrollably as he waited for the Les Hen to pass its judgment. But then he thought about his friends, and a flame of fury welled up within him, trying to consume him. His eyes turned bloodshot, and he struggled to break free. A few moments later, the vines around him uncoiled, but his head and back was pressed down by the Les Hen, forcing him to bend down with his face touching the ground. The Les Hen hunkered down and raised his head, staring into his eyes. Roy saw pity in his eyes, and that pity sucked Roy's soul into it. "Kneel before me, worship me, make me your God." Roy heard hundreds of people singing praises around him, and everything around him changed as the Les Hen showed him an illusion. Time passed, and Roy left Mount Carbon without Letho by his side. Eventually, he left Mahakam and settled down in a beautiful village, in the middle of nowhere. There, Roy lived his life as a simple farmer who toiled the fields honestly. After he was done with work every day, he'd worship a deer-headed god in the village. Thanks to that deity, the village enjoyed years and years of prosperity. He lived a satisfying life, and eventually, he got married, had children, and lived a quiet, peaceful life, but one thing never changed. His wife, his children, and his children's children started worshipping the same God he did, and it went on for generations, even after his death. No. This is all in my mind. It's fake. Roy bit his lip, the sharp pain and metallic taste waking him up, and then Letho's reminder rang in his head again. Les Hens will mark its believers so it can revive every time it's killed. Is it trying to mark me? Once that ludicrous idea popped up in his mind, Roy's struggles became fiercer, but the Lushan's strength proved stronger still. It held Roy down, pinning him deeper against the ground. A moment later, Roy gave up, his eyes turning unfocused, as if he had relinquished all control, letting the Les Hen do as it wanted. The Les Hen felt the change within him, and it lessened its grip on Roy, allowing him to sit up a bit. Then it held Roy's shoulder with one hand, creating a protrusion with the other. Then it tore through Roy's clothes, pierced his skin, and started etching its mark with Roy's blood. Am I really going to bow to him? Am I really going to be its slave and food? No witcher worth their salt will bow to a monster. Roy's confusion turned into resolve, and he remembered something sleeping in his inventory space, something he hadn't used ever since he got it. I still have a chance. A blob of yellowish, cheese-like stuff appeared in his hand. That was the vomit of the child hunter, an item with the effect of a dimeritium bomb, and even Letho praised the substance. Roy clenched it tightly and looked up into the Lushan's eyes. His face was contorted with rage, and he broke free of the Lushan's grasp, pushing himself up, slamming his hand against the arrow in the Lushan's eyes, betting everything on that single blow. Roy buried it deeper into the Lushan's head, wanting to crush it and turn it to a pulp. The Les Hen stopped etching the mark, and it took a step back, roaring into the heavens. White smoke billowed from its face, as if acid was biting through it. Its body trembled, not unlike branches buffeted by a gale. Roy finally had complete control of his body, and he stood up before quickly taking the torch from the cave's wall and tossing it to the Les Hen. The fire spread throughout the monster's body once it came into contact with the oil, turning the Les Hen into one big bonfire. It spread its arms, jumping around the place, howling, begging for its life. Roy looked at it coldly, his crossbow in hand, his bolt in his mouth, and then he reloaded the crossbow and shot the less hen. Once he was done, he switched places and did the same thing all over again. The less hen couldn't get out alive from the flames, for it was weakened, and its magic was sealed. A simple flame could spell the end of it, and a short while later, the Lushan's charred, lifeless body fell with a thud, countless arrows buried in its body. You killed a less hen. EXP plus 200. New character sheet unlocked. But that wasn't the end of the ordeal. Roy had just heaved a sigh of relief after reading the message, but an impending sense of doom filled him. He bristled and spun around reflexively, grabbing an arrow that appeared out of thin air. Then he used the momentum from the swing to stab backward, and it felt like he pierced something. Kerwin held his neck, but he couldn't stop the blood from gushing out of the wound. His beard was dyed crimson, and he was slowly dying. Kerwin stumbled backward, but his eyes never shifted from the boy. He hated the boy. No, he despised him, and he felt nothing but rage toward him. Why'd I lose control of my body at the last moment? And what's that crimson light behind that boy? Why.us.scum? Kerwin murmured, and those became his last words. His short sword fell from his hand, and his expression froze as he fell with a thud. He didn't want to die that way, but fate had dictated otherwise. You killed Kerwin Hoger. EXP plus 20. Roy plopped down onto the ground. His body and soul were ravaged by exhaustion and pain, but he had a job left to do, and he tensed up. Barney. Dave. Drew. Reagan. You guys okay? He stared down and started to sob, but a moment later, someone stirred. Relax. Reagan coughed. We're tough, so something like that can't kill us. It took all he had to push himself up. Get them up for me. They quickly checked on the other dwarves and heaved a sigh of relief. They're alive. Unconscious, but still alive. But Kerwin's dead. This could be a problem. Reagan held Barney up and pressed against Barney's philtrum. I killed him, so I'll take the blame, Roy decided. I'm not a resident of Mount Carbon, so it's not like Elder Brovar can do anything once I leave. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 70. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 70. Job Interface, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, 5th of December, 1260. The weather was great for once on Mount Carbon. The warm sun broke through the snow, melting away the doom and gloom that enveloped the city, and all of the dwarves were wearing broad smiles. Some of the inhabitants were standing around the stakes in the plaza, where the Scoia'tael members and Lushan's head hung, and they buzzed with excitement. I was on guard duty that night when the Witcher and his comrades dragged that monster into the valley. By Mahakams, that monster was hard to look at. Its whole body was charred, and it looked more like a whole ball of arrows than a less hen. Holy Mahakam! I have never seen such a hideous creature before in my life. I'd have run for my life if it had still been alive. Of course you would. You aren't the Witcher. He's one capable man, he is. I mean, he killed off the monster that plagued us for months, and he took out those scum too. I'm going to raise a toast for him at tonight's banquet. And don't forget about the Witcher's assistant. He's only around 20.7 in dwarf years, but he was already involved in the hunt. That's a real man right there. Gotta raise a toast for him too. Our archery champion and his brothers also took part in the hunt too, and Elder Brovar is going to praise them tonight. The dwarves looked envious. Those guys are going to be popular with the ladies after tonight. As if by coincidence, the dwarves omitted Kerwin from their discussion. At the same time, the people they were talking about were staying in the guest room, where the Witcher was. Reagan's head and thigh were bandaged, and he was explaining the situation to Roy, though he'd glance at Letho from time to time. Letho paid no attention to him, since he was meditating. Just a slight concussion. They'll be fine. Barney and the lads are snoring away in the infirmary. They'll be alive and kicking at the banquet tonight. That's good to hear. Roy heaved a sigh of relief. I wouldn't have forgiven myself if something had happened to them. That's not your fault. Reagan was surprisingly calm about death. If they somehow hadn't made it, then I guess Mahakam must have loved them more. Dying in a battle in the Mahakams against monsters and Scoia'tael scum would be an honor for them. Reagan paused for a moment. If you think about it, those scums were behind the death of my brethren. If we hadn't stopped them in time, they would have ruined even more families. Their deaths are necessary for the tribe, and killing them is truly a heroic deed. Our souls will be welcomed in Mahakam after our passing. Roy changed his opinion on the dwarves. He thought they were ignorant drunkards before the hunt, but then he knew they were actually devout, loyal, and courageous people. Did you see their faces when we hauled the Lushan's trophy and those Scoia'tael scum back? Reagan grinned and smacked his leg, but he hit his wound at the same time, and he gasped. Those guards and crossbowmen were gawking at us like idiots. Those guys were usually arrogant bastards who'd insult us whenever they got the chance. Barney's got it the worst. Reagan laughed. Now everyone knows we took part in the hunt, and were heroes of the tribe. You, Letho, and I were the only ones who could stand tall among them. I could imagine how charming I must have looked to the ladies. Reagan grinned. Some of them were beaming at me too. I know they were looking at me, because you and Letho weren't their type. I can smell romance in the air, Roy. And it's all for me. I would have gotten my hands on one of them if it weren't for the fact I have to team up with Paul soon. Such an optimistic guy. Roy listened in silence as Reagan babbled on and on and on, relieving him of the sadness and disgust he felt. All he could think of for the past 2 days was Scoia'tael's hatred for him and the illusion the Leshen showed him. He'd often fall into a trance. Eddie E.T. looks like I have to congratulate you on your romance. Roy grinned. But are you sure you want to leave Mount Carbon? Why don't you just marry some lady and raise a family? Reagan shook his head resolutely. I'm going to seek Paul out in Kedwen next year. The battle with the Leshen and Scoia'tael only made his interest in the outside world swell, since he couldn't do much in Mount Carbon. What about them? I can't shake Barney off, so he's coming. Not sure about Drew and Dave. Reagan pinched his beard, sounding slightly dismayed that half his squad might not follow him. Not every dwarf is ambitious. Some prefer a stable life. Roy had a feeling he might bump into Reagan in his adventures. Maybe we'll bump into each other in Kedwen, he blurted. I'll be sure to welcome you with open arms. Reagan shook his hand firmly and bumped shoulders with Roy. When are we going to the infirmary, Reagan? Patience. Get ready for tonight's banquet for now. Elder Brovar's going to reward you too in front of everyone. Not everyone gets this chance, so you shouldn't miss it. Reagan took out a gray, petite notebook, and a message that read, a gift to Roy. From Reagan Dalba, was written on the cover. Remember when you said you wanted to delve deeper into crossbows? I jotted everything I know in there, so take it. Thank you. Roy took the notebook with both hands, touched by Reagan's gesture. Once he saw Reagan off, Roy quickly concentrated on his character sheet. Roy age. 13 years and 11 months old status. Civilian, Witcher's disciple HP, 45 55ths, lightly injured, strength. 5 dexterity. 5.1 constitution. 5.5 perception. 7 will. 6 charisma. 5 spirit. 6.5 skills. Massacre level 3 level 4, bloody aura. Any enemy within 1 foot 2 foot of you has a 10% 15% chance of being feared by the aura of massacre. If the enemy's will is lower than yours, they will lose control of their body for a maximum of 1-2 seconds. You deal 10% 15% increased damage to any species you have killed before. New active skill. Fear. You may cast Fear to release the aura of Massacre, affecting a single target within a 2 feet range. The target is then forcibly controlled, and if their will is lower than yours, they will lose control of their body for a maximum of 2 seconds. 5-minute cooldown. Tip. Fear will level up based on the number and types of creatures you kill. Observe Level 2 Meditation, Level 1 Crossbow Mastery, Level 1 Level 3, 330/1500, Inventory Space. 1 cubic square. After killing the Skoya, tail members, the Sorceress, and Les Hen during that fight, Roy gained over 300 EXP. His Massacre even leveled up to 4, thanks to the Les Hen. It was also thanks to his new skill, Fear, that he managed to kill Kerwin. However, that wasn't his best loot. He scrolled down to the new sheet that came right after his skill sheet. Job Interface. You have killed a Grave Hag, Drowner, Child Hunter, Elf Sorceress, and Les Hen, coming to a total of 5 magical beings. You have learned meditation from a Witcher. You have acquired basic alchemy and monster knowledge. You have unlocked a job, Witcher. Witchers are mutants who have gone through the trial of the grasses. They possess superhuman speed, strength, reaction speed, coordination, life force, and recovery. Their main work comes from various requests, most of which involves monster hunting. Do you accept this job? Attention! You may only have one job at your current level. I can only have one job at my current level. Does that mean I can have more jobs when I level up? Roy was excited at that thought, but he stopped thinking too far ahead. He had no better choice at the time being, so he accepted the job, and his level turned into his job level. You have gained a job. Level 3 Witcher, 330/1500, rank. Disciple, conditions for next rank. Pass the trial of the grasses and kill 10 types of magical creatures, 5 out of 10. Next rank. Rookie Witcher. School. Viper, unconfirmed. User hasn't taken the decoction of the grasses yet. Job perks. Main stat. You may choose one stat as your main stat. Be warned that this choice cannot be undone. Every time you level up, your main stat will be increased by 0.5 without any cost, Disciple. Evolving arms. You may bind a steel sword, a silver sword, and a ranged weapon for this job. Bound weapons will grow alongside you, becoming stronger every time you level up. You will be able to feel the connection between you and your bound weapons no matter the distance, and you may summon them no matter where they are. Full recovery. You will make a full recovery every time you level up. Most injuries can be healed, including internal injuries and broken limbs. Debuffs such as hunger, fatigue, poison, plague, and curses will be removed. Loot package. You receive an additional cubic meter of inventory space, Disciple. You have 2 cubic meters of inventory space as of now. Locked. Roy was elated. Finally. I've been a weakling for too long. That risky Les Hen kill was worth it. Look at this. Full recovery is already awesome enough. An instant full recovery was akin to second wind in the world of Witchers, where danger lurked behind every corner. Roy could think of a few ways to use that, one of which being to keep himself from leveling up despite having a full EXP bar so he could keep full recovery in store. If he ever found himself backed into a corner in battle, he'd use it to turn the tides. I can even use this in the trial. Roy couldn't be happier, and Evolving Arms was tailor-made for him. He was about to give up on using Gabriel because it couldn't keep up with him, but with Evolving Arms, Gabriel could grow with him as long as he bound the weapon to him. Of course, binding the best crossbow would maximize his profit, but Roy didn't want to give up on the things he'd been carrying with him if he had the choice. Looks like you're not out just yet, old buddy. Roy sat on the bed, caressing his hand crossbow. You are about to bind Gabriel to you. Are you sure you want to choose Gabriel? Gabriel type. Hand crossbow materials. Mulberry wood, tendon, hemp details. Weighs 5 pounds and measures 2 feet. Has a draw weight of 20 pounds and an effective range of 100 feet. Yes. The moment Roy had that thought, he felt an inexplicable link between him and Gabriel. To be precise, it felt like a connection, or a mark. When he held it again, Gabriel felt light in his hands, as if it were his body's extension. Roy knew every inch of it by heart, and the crossbow became a coordinate he could always find, no matter the distance between them. And when he closed his eyes, he saw Gabriel floating in the darkness of his consciousness. Even if he was blindfolded, he could easily find it with that link between them. He cheekily tossed Gabriel at Letho, and then Roy extended his arm. A moment later, the crossbow disappeared and reappeared in his hand. This could be useful. He had no swords to bind, though he was planning on seeing the weapon Brovar would give Letho, and he smiled. Letho should be able to use it even if I bind it to me, right? He was in a dilemma over which stat he should choose as his main one. Should I go with perception? That's my strong suit. Or should I go with constitution or will? That'd help me pass the trial. Perception could increase the range of his vision and provide more details about his target, giving him more options to ambush, while constitution could improve his HP. That alone showed how crucial it was to Roy. Will could be used with his new skill, fear, providing a fearsome combo in close-quarter combat. If his enemies had lower will than he did, they'd be frozen in place the moment they got in range, and Roy would finish them off. Strength and dexterity would boost his close-quarter combat skills a lot, and he wouldn't be able to call himself a witcher if he couldn't swing a sword. Spirit was useless, but it wouldn't be for long. He'd have to learn about signs eventually, and spirit would boost the signs' power significantly. He could use signs once he passed the trial and unlocked his mana pool. It was hard to pass up on spirit, since it'd help out a lot in the late game. The only useless stat, at least to him, was charisma. Roy caressed his young, smooth face, and his taut biceps. After embarking on the path of the Witcher, Roy had changed into a lean, handsome young man, but that was useless. Not like my enemy's going to show mercy to me. And it's not like being handsome can help me survive longer. No, wait. A high enough charisma can be used in battle. The Less Hand managed to get the beasts to help it with its charisma. And it managed to brainwash strangers, turning them into believers. But he wasn't interested in using his charisma to fight. Roy was in a dilemma indeed, but no matter. It was still a while before he'd level up, so he'd choose after he'd made all considerations. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released.